All right, November the 25th is done in terms of the work that Mr. Brandon and I did to give you data 1 month after the setup of the lab. So you might remember in the first video that we had in fact scooped randomly 2 scoops from each one of the 2 buckets for the colony, control colony, 2 scoops per bucket for the treatment colonies. What Mr. Brandon and I did is we went ahead and we went through those scoops and separated out the bedding, which is just this wood chip material, to identify and find and isolate the mealworms at different stages of life. What we then did is we went ahead and we counted them. We'll look at the data in a minute. And then what Mr. Brandon and I did is we also then masked the counted mealworms so we could come up with some data for you to look at. So let's go and look at the data. So what we do, if you take a look at the data sheet, is that we have on the data sheet for November the 25th that there was in the control group from scoop 1, 6 mealworms. In scoop 2, there was 2. You need to determine the average number of mealworms for the control colony for this date. Below the line for the number of living organisms is mass. So scoop number 1, the mealworms weighed 0.60 grams. The mealworms from scoop number 2 weighed 0.24 grams. You're going to need to determine the average mass of an individual mealworm by adding up those 2 numbers, dividing by 2, and I'll give you the average. For the treatment side, right-hand side, scoop number 1, we had 4 mealworms. Scoop number 2, which I didn't identify, should be number 2, is 17 mealworms. We want the average number of mealworms from the treatment side. Below that will be the mass of the scoop number 1 mealworms is 0.31 grams. The mass of scoop number 2 was 1.35 grams. We want to sum those and divide by 2. That becomes the mass of an individual mealworm on November the 25th that was fed styrofoam.